starting it earlier.
Yeah, so now we are recording actually. I'm recording to the Zoom crowd. Watch out. I think it's encrypted also. So, whatever that may mean exactly. So the first half hour I thought would be more about the virtual community. But there is not a whole lot of things to say there. I can briefly show some things I've been doing. Maybe it has some validity for pedagogy as well. I will try to share my screen. One moment. So what I did is I used another paying service, I'm afraid, MindMeister for the virtual community. And so my first steps are pretty simple. I started out with the introduction. And so just putting up what's the objective, what's Howard's objective when he wrote a book that was to transform ourselves from mere social creatures into community creatures. And then I have another note here listing the references in the intro, starting with Scott Peck, who is the psychologist, having lots of ideas about the characteristics of what he calls true communities. There is the virtual community, the well. Then there are more esoteric, ancient references to stuff such as micromules, which I'm not sure whether it still exists. I tried to see whether the Wikipedia entry, I think it's pretty old itself, and it also seemed to suggest that it was still alive, but I could not really find a living community there. But maybe I have to look harder. Then you have Twix Tokyo, which is also, there are lots of stuff in Wikipedia, of course, like Minitel, etc.
Oh, I remember Minitel. That was like in the 80s.
Yeah, here it is.
Wow, it was in France, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It was.
I knew somebody that was really interested into that. Yeah.
It was their fight against Anglo-American imperialism. They were afraid that actually, since the internet would be more, they saw a kind of Anglo-Saxon mastership or control of the information superhighways, and they wanted to have their own alternative to counter that. And that
I didn't know that part of it. I was,
there is always a political subtext in France and in Europe for that, as for these initiatives. And then, of course, there are the MUDs. I try to find a more recent listing of MUDs because it's still.
Can I ask you something, Roland? Yeah. When you're screen sharing, how do you get it on the screen with the people? I can't seem to figure that out on Zoom.
Okay, on Zoom. So what I did was, let's go back to. So what I did is you have at the bottom of the screen you have share.
Yeah.
It's the green rectangle with the arrow pointing upwards. You click on that, and then you get all kinds of tabs on your browser which are open. And you just select one of those tabs, and you have to confirm in the right lower corner share again. And then, for instance, you show that particular screen.
Yeah, I know about screen sharing. I can do that. I just can't, when I screen share it, I don't see the people and the screen share in one window.
You lose the people actually. I have this slightly annoying but useful vertical rectangle which I can move around on my screen, and there I can see all the four of us.
That part of Zoom?
I see that display too.
Yeah, I see it too, but I don't. Maybe I'm just not playing with it enough. when I
you
do it.
can just move it around.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. And then I used hypothesis for the introduction, but this time the first time we used hypothesis for the book, we did it in a private group, called Augment. This time I'm just using the public layer of hypothesis, putting up stuff, thoughts about, and also seeing other people's reactions here. So, yeah. So this is, and the idea would be to, maybe it would be a good idea to do the same thing as what Joe did, and just putting the chapters into Google Docs. There it's way easier for most people to put annotations or to change hyperlinks, for instance. But still, I do like hypothesis, so I think I will continue using both. The idea would be to make an appendix to the book with more recent links and also updates about the interesting people and organizations he mentions. So that's the project. Yeah.
And then somehow merge the hypothesis, or just make them as a separate?
Well, the appendix could become part of the online version of the book. Because the book is a bit a kind of a archive in itself, a kind of historical document. We would not change the text itself, that we would just point the reader to the new appendixes in order to have a more recent view of the subject. I think that's the idea. Anyway, it's up to Howard to decide. He keeps it alive here online, which is a nice thing of him to do. So the book here is completely available, just as the Peeragogy Handbook.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but well, I will see whether others will join in to work on it. It's not that much work, I think. It depends how far you want to go. For instance, the MindMeister stuff, I can show that as well. The MindMeister mind map, it can be transformed into a wiki mind map. We'll put it up. Here it is.
Oh, sorry. I know I'm messing with you here.
You did it. You did it. Okay.
I was just trying your thing, but I couldn't figure out which selection it was.
Yeah, it's a bit. Well, every tool has its own.
Yeah. I'll figure it out.
Stuff to figure out. It's interesting in itself, but you're right. If you're using too many tools, then the stuff you actually want to get done becomes a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not as intense about it as I sound. I just I got too much going on.
So this is one of my other mind maps, but okay, so this is MindMeister, and the problem here is once again that this is an old one. Let's have a look. There we go.
Do you still use the brain, or did you ever use that?
Yeah, I still use it. There are moments that I stop using it, but now I'm once again in a phase in which I do use it pretty intensely. But I will have another look at the tutorial, because that too, of course, has its own.
I know.
And things you have to. Okay.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah. Hey, Joe.
Hello.
Yeah. So this is the MindMeister stuff, and I can just say here, share it, and how do I publish map? First of all, I will publish the map. Okay. And then I can say, well, let's make it, I give it a category. Well, it's about virtual community. So what should we call it? Education, productivity, let's say just technology. That's a public link. And everyone can edit. And I allow to copy and to export it. I want a shareable link. This is the link. Okay. And so now it should be a kind of a wiki mind map that I will put it into the chat. Yeah, as asked. Here it is. And I think that even people who have no subscription to MindMeister just can see the map and even edit it as well.
There's an unfortunate kind of coda or footnote on that, which is if you have a free account and you have more than 3 maps already, then you can't.
And then you can't, also when the map is, you did not initiate the map, you have no longer access to invites, for instance?
I've tried this before. I mean, without trying to go into it and take time now, it could be problematic if you have more than 3 maps already in your account. Yeah.
Because what I tried, I just put this link into a browser I never use, Safari, and it just allowed me to gain access and to change stuff without identifying me. Or maybe it did identify me, of course, without my knowing so. But I think it.
Okay, that's good.
So it's worthwhile trying. If these limitations would exist, then of course another solution should be found. Yeah, I totally agree. Maybe the mind map could also be interesting for the Peeragogy project, for brainstorming or stuff like that. It's something very different from annotation, of course.
So it just occurred to me right now that in the Peeragogy context, such a map, we might actually refer to it as like related to a road map. We have these patterns that are meant to kind of be an overall guide to the handbook, and they fit together. There is a picture of them fitting together, but it just looks like spaghetti. So I think that making a nicer picture, that it's a bit more organized. I mean, the fact that it looks like spaghetti is probably a good sign that we don't really have a very detailed, thorough map of what's going on, because it's all densely wadded together into one thing. So I think it's a good idea to revisit that. Maybe using the patterns could be a nice thing to pour together with that.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a bit about the virtual community handbook. If there are any other suggestions about making those updates to the book, don't hesitate, just tell me. If not, we can just continue with the Peeragogy Handbook.
Maybe before we get on to that, though, I'm sorry I missed a few minutes of this, but I think it would be nice to have a kind of landing page for the virtual community that kind of combines all of the updates. We could sort of say virtual community now 2019, or I guess it'll be 2020 maybe before that's public. But like, what is, summarizing the changes, and also kind of looking at, summarizing. It could be a whole chapter, really. Like I guess Howard wrote this forward to the Peeragogy Handbook. Maybe we could write a sort of backward to the virtual community rather than a forward that we would say, or afterward, I guess. We'd say this is how the community has received it. That could be a nice way to sum up the various contributions that people have made during the reading group.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I also intend to put the annotations for the virtual community and the chapters themselves actually into the Google Doc, just as we do, as you did, Joe, with the Peeragogy Handbook, because it's easier for many people to make annotations and changes there. And then we could create a folder into Google Docs, and part of the folder could be this summarizing chapter, keeping track of all the changes, something like that. Of course, it's once again using one of the stacks, Google, but well, yes, we could just as well use HackMD for that. But my impression is that not everyone is too happy to learn yet another tool, and for instance, HackMD is using Markdown, just as GitHub, for instance, is doing, and that frightens some people. They just think, oh, I have to learn Markdown, and it's complicated, and it's all different. Why do they do this? And they just get a bit distracted from the main objective.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just frightening. It's just, people get pissed off when they have to change something. And then you don't have productivity of any kind.
There is this lack of time. Most people struggle with that, and it's already very nice if people want to join for these projects, and if they feel that they have to spend even more time just in order to get on board, that's not a very good thing, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe
it just might be good to keep using something if it's productive and the project is moving forward. You keep using it until, there's maybe a new technology subgroup that's investigating all this other stuff. If there's a problem with the way things are going, or it's too expensive or whatever, then they present that to the rest of the group. I don't know.
Yeah, so Charlotte, I just want to say I agree with you 100%. I wish I had 110%. I could agree with you 10 extra %. But
go ahead.
No, okay. I will go out and personally source 10 extra % so I can agree with you 110%.
You're the mathematician.
Should be okay. But it is interesting when you look at something like one of the questions, just if we're transitioning towards the handbook, kind of relating the virtual community book to the handbook, is people have sort of challenged us and said, how are you going to publish and deal with this book that's a living process? And it doesn't look like a normal book, and it doesn't look like a whereas the virtual community does look like a normal book. And I have to say, I think that's one of its, to its credit, it wouldn't have been published and republished if it had not been
a normal book,
accessible. And yeah. Okay, I'm supposed to be getting a call, but no, I'm supposed to be talking to you guys. I'll call this other call later. Okay, decline that. I'll decline that and call later. Okay.
Yeah. So let's maybe go to the Peeragogy Handbook now. It's half an hour far now. And maybe I just should share the forward, the Howard's forward. Share. Okay, here it is. And yeah, where he actually tells about how the project started and where his inspiration came from. And now one of the the things I did, I started changing a bit the text because I think we can do this here, but we cannot change the forward very much, or even maybe not at all, because well, it's Howard's forward, and there is a timestamp somewhere, I think, saying that, well, this is Howard Rheingold in Marion County, January 2014. So this is a kind of an historic piece of the book, and it's Howard's text. And there is not very much in it which is problematic. The only thing which could be interesting to think about again is, for instance, he says we started with a wiki here, and then he links to the wiki, actually the wiki at the social media classroom, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, no longer used. So maybe we just can leave that there is a wiki, but without having this confusing link to a page which is no longer active, even though it can be interesting to have the link for historical reasons again.
Is it, quick question, I don't think I ever saw that wiki, but
I will show it here. I think you see it now, the wiki.
Oh, cool.
Yes, this is the thing. So there is quite some stuff on it, how it came about, how you can help. So this was really a kind of community hub, I think, for the first edition. And but here it is indicated that peeragogy.org became the new main organizing hub. See how to get involved for more specifics. So it's maybe not too problematic. People have a look here. Anyway, they are being redirected to peeragogy.org.
Okay, I guess I was just curious if it was, to the extent it was a functioning wiki, if it could just be, I don't know, cloned, or what's the right word, forked, and then kind of just updated as a wiki in parallel to what we're doing as well. Or I don't remember if we touched on that.
So in principle, I suppose it would be possible to request a login and go update it. The one problem, though, is that regarding forking is I don't think everyone who signed up to that wiki actually, I might be wrong about this, but I'm not sure if everyone who signed up to that wiki actually signed the contributor agreement, because we still hadn't worked out the contributor agreement when we first had the wiki. So it could be the case that wiki is basically just a bunch of people working on what they're doing and can't really be cloned except for research purposes or something, that, you know. So my strong suspicion is that we added the permission statement back on top retroactively so those people who have signed it.
Okay.
But that in general we can't just clone the whole wiki because we don't have people's permission to do that.
Okay, good to know. And then I guess last thing on this, and we can just move on, is again, just sort of guessing without really looking at it. Maybe the basic terms, adding keywords, I don't know, could be used as a jumping off point for just a new wiki. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks.
Sorry, I was slightly distracted from multitasking and trying to write down what you had just said. Could you say that one more time?
I'm just imagining that there could be still some value in the word, the entries, the basic entries without the content, as a keyword, as a jumping off point for a new wiki.
Yes, I think that's a good idea, and I think that even just if it's someone was to go back and we were talking, Charlotte and I were talking, I think yesterday, about some archival work, and this would be an interesting task for someone who wanted to go back to the very beginnings of the project, look through the posts, and again, what Roland was just saying about mapping, because in a sense that wiki is the seeds of the project, right? So, or contains the seeds of the project, or some of them. And it would be really nice to know what was going on there, what worked and what didn't work at the start of that project, and just have a bit of a study on that. No, it wouldn't have to be a clone, but it could be a documented thing. I realize it's a little different from what you were just saying, but basically I agree with you that we shouldn't just leave it as a link that, furthermore, hardly anyone can actually access. I think only people who have a login can even access the wiki. So we could do better than that.
Yeah. So you see how good the annotations work on the Google Docs document. You see Joe explaining that, reacting on my question about whether we still want to link to the wiki for historical reasons. Then he mentions the issue of the waiver, which makes it problematic to redistribute the contents there. So also there is a login issue. So it functions rather well, those annotations. That's at least my impressions. Then here we see how Howard refers to Google Plus, which is a historical correct thing, because we moved for a long time, I think, on the Google Plus community platform, and it's true that it was a messy process at the start. So here we should mention, and we will see in the next few pages, that the Google Plus community is being mentioned quite a few times, while my impression now is that the Peeragogy community is primarily on groups, google.com, and the Peeragogy forum there, which means that also the ancient name of the community pretty much gone. I keep forgetting what the name was. It was something about, what was the name again of the Google Plus community?
It was called Peeragogy in Action, which was also confusing because that was the name of our syllabus.
Yeah, Peeragogy in Action, yes. And the Peeragogy group is just Peeragogy. So I think maybe not here in the forward, because that's a document from 2014, but in the introduction, we just have to take care to change systematically, I think, the references to the Google Plus stuff to the group's Google stuff. And the other thing is what Joe said, that we are no longer using WordPress for publication, but GitHub. And there the suggestion is we should add this updated information in brackets or footnotes in the 4th edition. It's maybe a good way to preserve the forward, but yet updating it. The more underlying issue that I have, not an issue, but more what I'm worrying about, but maybe we are just working on that right now, is how we can make the community, the Peeragogy community, more vibrant again. Because if I look at the Google groups, I really see that Joe and Charlotte are working very hard there. But as time passes, there seem to be less people who are contributing a lot, or maybe they do, but they are not necessarily active into the Google groups platform.
So I have a comment, which is just to say thank you right now, again, right back to you, Roland, because I am getting more already out of this discussion than I think I got out of the Google Plus community for years, because I don't think very many people actually posted there. So, and we're actually looking at the handbook. So I think in a way we have an answer to your question already in the form of this reading group. So, I mean, this is a partial answer because this is for right now, but if we could save it and sort of share this form with other people, this is exactly what I was hoping would happen. So that's a partial answer anyway.
But then that's not a question which we can answer today, but I think the further issue is, do we think that Google Groups is the ideal platform for the community interaction about the handbook and pedagogy in general, or are there other platforms out there which would be more efficient, more appealing for people? One of the things I do like about the Google Groups is that it's of course tightly integrated with Google Mail, and that you see the discussions that just pop up in your inbox unless you don't want to. But I guess that other platforms have the same kind of affordances.
I kind of like the Mattermost type of setup. I think we touched on this a bit.
Yes.
It's my 2 cents.
The what is that?
Well, it's Slack, but the kind of open source cooler version is Mattermost, but it also requires a bit more on this setup side.
Right. I'm not the only one weighing in on this, but I have about 8 groups on Slack as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm probably not likely to go on another similar platform without some, you know, heavy lobbying.
I think just very briefly, I do like the channels structure, or affordances, that it's sort of instant to go to different topics.
So this is what I'm sharing now is the Mattermost setup for the open learning, what they call the open learning over there, and what Robert is and Charles actually are driving forces behind it. As you see, it's just like Slack, but
it's just be nice if there was one program that could just like knit this all together for you. You know, I think it would be. I don't know how that would happen, but
yeah, it's interesting. You know, the first thing I did when I got this new smartphone was install about 10 different incompatible communication protocols. You know, I've got Signal, Telegram, Skype, Hangouts, text messages, probably. That's not a half dozen, but I'm getting there. Anyway, you know, and each Skype and Hangouts has 2 different versions each, so I'm already more than a half dozen. Oh, Zoom, of course. So, you know, it's quite funny. But I think Roland's question about how can we make the community more vibrant and active is the right question. I think a technology solution is another good question, but I feel like, or you know, what technology should we use? But I feel like there's like 2 or 3 intervening questions in between those questions. Like, for example, one of the things we've been talking about is like video platforms, and I think one of the key issues is like, how is the community already vibrant and active? Who are the people who are already using it? We had this great conversation with this one woman from MIT, and she pointed out that, you know, often people think about starting a new community and then they think, oh, they forget that I'm already part of a community. We're part of a community already. So, so anyway, I don't want to blather too much about it, but it's really interesting that these technologies even come up in the context of the forward, right? And we were critiquing the forward based on the fact that we've changed technologies as things have evolved. So I think that is an interesting story, but it doesn't, to me, that doesn't seem to be like a teleological story. It's more like, oh, this thing no longer works. What can we find that will replace it? Maybe we should be a bit more goal-directed, thinking about like, what do we really want to achieve with the project? So, so maybe that would be a good second question. Like, it's good. How can we make it vibrant? But then, what do we really want to achieve?
Yeah, that's one of the. What do we want to achieve? And related to that, that's more, I think, for the next meeting where we will talk about one of the very first chapters, which made me wonder who is the intended audience of the book. Because you have pedagogy is about peer-to-peer learning, so I think people such as us here, no longer not necessarily being in an educational institution, but wanting to learn together as adults. And then one of the very first chapters just puts you squarely into the school environment again, or the college environment, with a very in-depth case study about a project with student reactions and etc., which is in itself interesting, but because it just seems about to start the book, gives you the impression, oh, so this is primarily for professors in a college who want to experiment with new ways to teach students, while it is much broader, of course, than that.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to ask Howard. This would be another, if Howard was jumping in, it would be a nice question for Howard, because he was in the school or university environment, and yet, you know, so I'm not quite sure what his answer to that question would be. But I definitely agree with what you're saying as to the way the project has gone.
Well, the interesting thing is that the Berkeley people very disappeared. I think after the first meeting, they were almost all gone, because and that's also something interesting to note, is that it's very hard to implement such a change inside an institution. Maybe you can do it. They will allow it as a kind of a experimental little garden somewhere, but it is actually about abolishing a hierarchy and even almost the business model of as it exists right now of a college. So maybe they are not too keen to embrace pedagogy in any meaningful scale, which would mean that this is something which is more relevant outside than inside universities. I'm not sure. Maybe it's too provocative what I'm saying now, but
no, I think it's good that you are saying it, and I think, you know, we've been provoked to think about it already. Yeah. I don't feel like we have the answers to those questions yet, so it's good that you raised them.
Yeah, of course.
Guys, can you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
Nice. Hi guys, my name is Victor here. I've been talking to Joe and Charlotte. I'd like you to propose a question or to suggest something. If we have a mapping process, for example, to know like in every place, every university or every country, city, that we have a pedagogy ideas or projects, that therefore we can start to gather people together using a graphic system. I studied social networks here in Santa Catarina Federal University. I got acquainted to this software that I don't know how to use it very well, but it links and makes counts the links of people and organizes this. Maybe it's a strategy to know better, like how to engage people, like to getting known by people, to promoting people. As you said, like my podcast, my video, but to know like what people we want.
So that's a really interesting suggestion, to combine mapping the book and the content with mapping the people who are actually using it or doing some kind of pedagogy in their local communities. I think in a way there is that kind of ambition in this project, you know, because you remember Howard was coming out of the Whole Earth catalog and such, and kind of that wasn't about creating everything and selling it all. It was kind of about mapping what was there and what was interesting, what people would find interesting. So I do think the Peeragogy Handbook shares that same kind of ethos. But what you're talking about, doing that using technology of various kinds, absolutely, yeah, that does make sense. So I think that would be a good thing to add in.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in, and I think some of us were part of some preliminary discussions where when I also came up with this idea, which is the way to incentivize the engagement. And I think if I understood a little bit, so mapping would definitely be a big part of it. I'm a passionate mapper, as many of you know. And there's a kind of core, and I've been through a couple of courses with Howard, and understand I guess there are kind of core set of tasks or roles involved in pedagogy, or as goes on in Howard's courses, and including note taking and mapping and wikis and so on. And there's sort of a relatively defined or finite, maybe not totally finite, but set of tasks. And I think each of those, well, they need to be done to kind of do the collective learning, and people are busy, and this is not paid work, and so and I don't have sort of all the answers, but I'm feeling a potential in also raising funds to support putting this idea together to do a decentralized autonomous organization. I mean, there's different kind of terms and variations, but initially just kind of look at what are the tasks, and then start to assess, and that's maybe the tricky part, what are the relative values involved, and maybe it's just a straight, time-based kind of freelance approach or whatever, but start to understand the relative values for the tasks involved in doing. I mean, it's not just work, it's play, but there's time and effort involved. And then there could actually be a business model to kind of collectivize this whole collective process, if that makes sense. I hope that did. There's a little rambling, but yeah.
Sorry. So I think for me personally, definitely, and yeah, that's something Vitor and I talked about a couple weeks ago. Indeed, and it comes up from time to time. But we should keep in mind, what Roland was saying before, that like there's a tension with the university, and they definitely have an existing business model. At least for now, they have got a business model that seems to work pretty well. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting line of questioning, and it has come up from time to time. What's also interesting that there isn't a chapter in the handbook about business. I mean, even just peer learning in business, which would be an obvious use case for peer learning. Leaving aside the idea of applying that to this stuff.
There was one thing I wanted to add, which is a kind of a question which came up at the beginning of the call as well. This sort of core values of open source or anti-stack, and if not now, then sooner or later, and I think that relates to the potential cost of some of these tools that we were talking about also at the beginning of the call. What costs, what's worth paying for, even though they might be evil or whatever, because they're so easy and nice to use. Anyway, I'm done.
I must say, the idea of mapping reminds me a bit of what Robert is doing, of course. He created this map of the ecosystem around Dig Life, which is something similar, I guess. Am I right about this, Robert, or is it too far-fetched? I think you're muted. No.
You can hear?
Yep.
Yep.
Now I can hear. Yep.
Is it too loud? You can hear?
No.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly which map you're talking about. I've sort of been playing with lots of different mapping tools over the years, and yeah, contributed to creating an open source one myself called MetaMaps. But one called Kumu is kind of a nice. It's not open source, but it's free to public projects, and it works pretty nicely. But yeah, I don't know. A lot of the themes I've heard here are things that I'd be interested in exploring. So yeah, even on the sort of business plan or economic plan side of things, I think a few of you would have heard something I've was working on for a while called Open Learning Commons, but I was thinking of it more as a commons. So I don't know how many commons sort of think of themselves as a business with a business plan, but they're doing like sort of the same sort of things, just kind of working together to produce or at least take care of something, and they want some sort of means to protect it, even if protecting it just means to keep it open, which it seems like is what has been done with the handbook itself. Is the content is basically open content, which is something I'd be very interested in producing. So yeah, we've been using Mattermost as Roland explained, although I'm interested in moving more into using other tools that are more federated, so that these little communities, if and when they want to sort of shift away, it's not like they're trapped on a server or something. They can sort of just either host their own server or shift their data, and it makes that a lot easier. So a tool that actually we might consider playing with, that is actually a beautiful example of this is the Federated Wiki by Ward Cunningham, which I'm assuming, I don't know, assume a bunch of the people that's worked on the handbook are maybe aware of it, but it sort of enables this type of interaction that makes it easy to sort of create your own space, and then if you host your own server, just sort of copy over your files, and that's as good as having your own space. You don't have to worry about Google shutting down services and stuff like that. I don't know, I'm rambling now too, so I'll just stop.
No, not at all. I just posted about the Federated Wiki, the Wikipedia entry about it. And that's, I think at least that should be in the chapter about the tools and the of the Peeragogy Handbook. The tension here is between the concern Charlotte also and me too we have about, well, we want to get out, for instance, the next edition of the handbook, but if you have to learn all those new complicated things, then maybe people will get very frustrated and irritated, not because it's so very complicated, but because you just lack time and you think, oh my gosh, and another thing is showing up, I have to learn. And so but yet we also, I think, need to experiment with stuff such as Federated Wiki. But there I think it's good that specialists take the lead and show how to do it.
Yeah. Roland, I like it very much.
Oh, go ahead.
Roland, I like it very much, the idea. I think to wiki would be like a minimal value test, like to test the hypothesis. Also, I just suggest we write an article, a scientific article. Here in Brazil, I was learning the metrics, how they used it is, and maybe it would be like interesting to seek around. And therefore, we can gather professors to sign the article and then to start to evangelize the idea.
Yeah. I mean, can I just say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
I run into people all the time, and I give my little elevator speech about peeragogy, and they're interested. But they're not people like you or even me. You know, they would hear Federated Wiki and run screaming away from the project. But they're interested in peer learning, and they're interested in, you know, bootstrapping and non-hierarchical learning experiences. So I'm just saying, you know, we're going to, unless we just run the risk of alienating people like that who might otherwise be really valuable contributors to the project.
So Charlotte, I agree with you, and I think let's kind of maybe restate some of the mission of this project. And also how it works. So I think some of the important factors is, like, this is a project, it's an open source project, but it's an open source project for people, right? So for people, any kind of people, those people you mentioned, the professors Vitor mentioned, for Ward Cunningham himself, or other people who develop free and open software. No, good question is it especially for software people? And I think probably it's not especially for them, but I do think that they are maybe especially missing this, because if you were in a business, say Amazon or something, they have like HR, and HR will train you and help you learn the skills you need to learn. So I know, because my sister works at Amazon, that she's getting trained on how to do machine learning and stuff like that. Well, you know, she did a journalism degree and a business degree, so she's not a computer scientist, but Amazon is paying for her to take a class on machine learning. Now, you know, this is not a handbook just for people who've studied computer science or machine learning or business or journalism. It's for all kinds of people. But if we can't serve someone who wants to learn machine learning, for example, using free and open source tools, then we're sort of saying, oh, well, you've got to go work at a company like Amazon in order to learn that, which isn't what we're saying, right? Or you know, you have to go publish your books with a big publisher. No, you know, we can help you learn how to do publishing and stuff like that. So I think it's about all of these different topics, none more than the others, except trying to connect them all and look at what they have in common is our way to try to gain some leverage here. So yeah, I don't think there are any wrong answers. And I think this is another thing I want to say that I've been learning just this year in the project, because I keep learning things. It's the attitude that one brings to the project. So, you know, like, for example, Charlotte has sometimes said, you know, this should happen or this shouldn't happen. And like a year ago, I would have been like, my hackles would have been up like, why are you telling me what to do or why not to do it? But lately I've like completely relaxed about that and come back to that view that like every edit is meant to be an improvement. So when Charlotte says this should happen or this shouldn't happen, I view that as like a genuine expression of something that's an improvement to the project. You know, even if it's saying, hey, Joe, you should do this thing you didn't do, or you shouldn't do this thing you did do. Like, that's very helpful, and it has reduced my stress. So I don't know if that really is related much to what we were talking about audience, but I think that it's learning how to collaborate is something that the book should help with, and I would say that I'm still learning about that. So that's enough about that.
Yeah, I think my point is, let's just, like, I know for a fact that everyone on this call is at a high technological level, if not like a, you know, programmer or something, you know, we just have to put ourselves in the place of people we want to reach and bring along and help, really.
Yeah. The core is the handbook as far as sort of format, accessibility, right? And then going out from there, then there's already kind of variations, at least in this discussion, and like with the Google Docs and Hypothesis, for example, and then we have some other potential tools or platforms in terms of the collaboration part and the communication. So, and then, you know, Federated Wiki used as a prime example of what's going to scare people off. And I'm just thinking that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, and you don't have to scare people. You don't have to tell them, or if you do tell them, it's not required that they have to even look at it at the Federated Wiki, for example. So that's just how I'm approaching this. And, you know, there could be some half of us, for example, or a couple of us, you know, would be really into making the wiki happen in tandem and parallel, and harvesting and having that reflect in whatever ways.
I think so too. There's no exclusivity here. There is a chapter called Technology, Services and Platforms. So I think, and one of the chapter mentions pedagogy, technology, forums, wiki, real-time meetings, and how to organize a MOOC. So wiki can encompass federated wikis, but at the same time, we could, instead of just talk about it, have some people showing how it actually works and why it is so, why it would be a good fit for pedagogues to be involved. And then it's a bit more challenge to those federated wiki specialists to, well, show as a kind of a prototype and how it actually would be beneficial to learners, and try to explain how we can, if it's really so beneficial, how we can do this without having to get a computer degree first. But at least in theory, it seems something which is very much related to our philosophy of pedagogy. Yeah. Maybe a last look at the forward, because something very special is happening there. One moment. This is my inbox. This is not what I wanted to show. So what did I want to show? Sorry about this. This is weird. Because at the bottom of the forward page on Google Docs, I suspect it's Joe. There is a kind of a real-time summary of everything we are saying and doing here. Yeah, here it is. Okay, I can show. Some notes from reading group discussion, as you see. And all the points we discussed are in here. A big thanks for doing this, because I actually forgot to ask people to do certain roles while we were meeting here, such as note keeping, for instance, or link searching. But it happens nevertheless, even without asking, which is very good. So one of the very sometimes changes in the text are very simple. So, for instance, the CC is Creative Commons zero waiver. I just put a little link in there to the zero waiver explanation on the Creative Commons site, so people have an idea what we are talking about. This being said, maybe it's time to go to the other chapter we wanted to have a look at, and that's the introduction. Is this here? And so here, especially here, I changed already the Google Plus community. I deleted it and replaced it by the Google Groups stuff. And then there is the scrapbook with the outstanding pedagogical problems, which I think is very nice and creative to admit upfront that we don't have the answers to everything, and that actually it's a process, an ongoing project, and that there are still lots of things we want to do better. But in general, for instance, here we say what is pedagogy, and then the explanation is pedagogy is a flexible framework of techniques for peer learning and peer knowledge production. And then we contrast it with pedagogy. Sometimes I wonder whether working with points, kind of more lists, might be interesting to, or yeah, like for instance, putting this now in bold, for instance, so that the book is scannable for people who actually have a peer-to-peer learning project, don't want to, or don't feel they have immediately the time to go into the deeper stuff or the more philosophical or theoretical stuff, but just want to just say, well, give me the elevator pitch. What is pedagogy? Tell me in 3 points. Why should I be interested? And then for the rest of the book also just really taking care to always say in a very brief and actionable way, these are very concrete recommendations to get your peer-to-peer learning project up and running. so that, and then you can have in-depth case studies, but in such a form that they are consultable, but they don't get in the way for people who just want to have a kind of a recipe for their own project. But that's just my very personal impression. It's just maybe I'm wrong here. It's just what I thought while reading it.
Could I just briefly respond? I think that's a great suggestion. I mean, later on, I think down here we're going to come to some stuff about what we're aiming to do in version 4. But I think you've put it quite well, and I think that having a 1 or 2 or 3 page comic book or graphic novel at the start of the book, or even at the start of each chapter, wouldn't be bad from the reader's point of view, right? Like something that would just make it super easy to understand.
Yeah.
And someone who never flips beyond that will understand something and take it home with them. And someone who wants to flip ahead will have that as a strong memory. I think that would be an improvement.
Yeah, and working with steps also. First do this, then do that, finally think about that. It sounds a bit silly, but for instance, I've been reading a book about how to research trends analysis. And well, okay, this is not the kind of Derrida or Michel Foucault or Baudrillard's kind of book. This is more a book saying, well, you have step 1, spot, step 2, select, step 3, document. And then they go into detail, and and they have case studies, they have interviews, but the layout is such that you realize, okay, I can read the interview if I have time. If I feel that I just want to prepare something and I'm very hurried, then I skip the interview and I just scan the book. The book is just highly scannable. And I do realize that this is a kind of a fast food kind of reflex of mine, but sometimes it's good to have such a very scannable document which explains to you how to do stuff, and then once you get hooked and you want to go deeper and say, well, what's the background of it? Where does the idea come from? What did other people do, and what were the pitfalls? You can find that also, but it's more a kind of a design kind of issue of how to organize it in such a way that people, and I think it's a very good idea to say at the beginning or the end of each chapter, just make a summary of 3 or 4 points telling people what they should look into.
Nice suggestions there. And yeah, I'm afraid that we will get even more bogged down in later sections. So it's a good thing to remind us at the start, not just of the start of the book, but the start and end of every section to prevent that feeling. So good idea.
Yeah. Could someone put the link to the document that you're working on again? I'm sorry, I just in my email somewhere.
Yeah, it's a good idea, the comic book stuff. But putting the points, for instance, that any one of us could do, even if you can't make cartoons, which I don't think I would be able to do it. Even if you can't, if you're not strong in gaming mechanics or multimedia, you can still make these kind of little practical summaries telling people what the bare essentials of each chapter are. But of course, if we can attract people who have those special skills, then by all means, let's hope they want to get involved again. Oh, here's a document. I was wondering about the chapter here about the introduction, where we tell people about our problems or issues we still want to solve, whether it is not too much about ourselves. And of course, it's interesting because Peeragogy project in itself is a peer-to-peer learning project, but maybe it would be more logically to put it somewhere at the end of the book, because the reader wants to find a solution for a problem. They want to, that's the way I try to imagine it, they want to organize the stuff like something peer-to-peer learning like, and they get a book and they don't want to learn that much about the guys and the women making the book. They just want a solution for whatever they are trying to accomplish. And then it's maybe a bit strange to try to involve them into the making of the book itself.
So yes, absolutely, that's true. I think that another way to present it would be, you know, as a real survey of the content. We have these the summary thing, which isn't in our reading list for today, but it sort of summarizes this thing as a kind of push. But the introduction could also have a workbook somewhere, and we could sort of say, in this book, you will meet, you know, Roland, who learned how to organize really great reading groups using peer learning approach, and you'll meet, you know, Charlotte, who used peer learning in her publishing and stuff like that. So we could introduce the authors and co-authors of the book and other people as well. You know, you'll generally, you know, meet the people who contributed to the book, but that's different from saying, and you can help us make a book. We could just maybe have one sentence about that here, because I think this version is somehow trying to be really inviting that you can join in. And that's true, but I think that was assuming that the community was very active, that the book was like a companion to the community. And that's sort of true. But, you know, so, but then why do we have a book as opposed to just having meetings and discussions? So there's those two, there's that tension between like, yeah, please come and join in our discussion, and look, here's the book that's quite valuable. Was it, I think Charles was saying, you know, the book is the core, and I think we could explain that, right? That you know, yeah, we have ongoing meetings, and one of the things we do is work on the book because the book is the core, but also at least in principle, we could help you solve some of those other problems that you're bringing along. And that the book is a sampler for that, but if you want to get even more involved, we can be even more helpful. I don't know if I'm fully believing what I'm saying now, but it would be different from what we say here for sure.
I would just interject, and yeah, I agree, and sort of where my mind is going just at the moment relates to the physical book, in contrast to, or maybe above and beyond, or it's the other way around, the digital versions, variations, and sort of extensions in the tech realm. And I don't know if it's, I'm wondering, maybe it's an open question, how much time is it worth to kind of look at that physical compared to the virtual or not. It's just something I was just kind of flashing on. Because the physical in the classroom also has an entirely different flavor and application, let's say. In the physical classroom, sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot to handle there, and I think that's another point. Another way to put it is like in this introduction, we don't want to introduce the book, but we also kind of want to introduce the community and the process and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on, or that could be going on here. Was that something you wanted to say, Robert? Because I can't. Dumb smartphone, so I can't actually see the chat very well.
Can you hear me? I can speak it if that's easier. It seemed we were referencing mapping earlier as a way to help people sort of find the resources that they're particularly looking for. So it just popped to my mind that as a book, I'm familiar with something like a choose your own adventure thing, where you sort of jump around the book as you're finding what you're looking for. So yeah, just thinking that it's like a crossover between a book and a map. Be sort of a fit if the book's not exactly meant to be sort of read from beginning to end or something like that in a linear way.
I'd be definitely all for getting into the mapping mode as well.
How can we do that concretely? Enter the mapping mode. Are there people here who want to try it on their own, or form a kind of a smaller group to explore the mapping possibilities?
Well, unfortunately, one of the first questions is which tool or tools.
Yeah.
I'm gonna focus on the content of the book, but
sorry, I'm interrupting you, Charlotte. Or am I?
Well,
sort of.
I was just kind of finding my way here. Yeah, I just made some notes on the introduction. I mean, are we agreed that we can just go in the document and change it like we always have?
I mean, on this version, yes, that's why we made this Google Doc version, so you can easily go in and change it, yeah.
All right. Well, I put some suggestions in, and it's kind of, I think they're kind of fundamental because under the peer learning and peer production, because, I don't know if that's what's in people's minds. I mean, to me, it's kind of, I love it because I work with different groups about, and try and be collaborative, but I'd be interested to see what you think.
Just back to your comment on, Charlotte, on mapping, in contrast to focusing on the content. I don't see them as separate, but I'm comfortable and fluid with mapping, and I see it as a potentially elegant way to mold and shape and rearrange, and I use it as an editing tool for sure. So it's all possible.
So I have a specific comment about that, which is that if we go back to this concept we had of a roadmap, the initial outline for the Peeragogy Handbook, which probably is someplace on that wiki we were just talking about, and we could at least find a screenshot of that outline, would be quite interesting to look at. And that outline is kind of like a table of contents. And so we have got this version 4 table of contents. But I definitely like the idea of bringing back the visual dimension of that. And so yeah, I agree with what you said. Mapping is not separate from the content. It's a map of the content in the case of a table of contents or a visual presentation of that stuff. And in principle, the prose that specifies this introduction should be a prose presentation of the map somehow. So I think that we want all 3 of those levels working together, and right now we don't really have them all working together.
I would just add or distinguish between, and these are also not exclusive, mutually exclusive, the process aspect and the, let's say, presentation or publication aspect. In other words, the mapping I see first and foremost as a process augmenter, and but certainly it can be used as a result, as a product as well.
I would say, by all means, try to show it using whatever platform you want to, because once the idea becomes more clear, we can still discuss, well, what platform it should be, but let's not get too hung up about what platform we would use for the mapping.
So, quick question, Roland, in regard to MindMeister, because I didn't really test it, but the map that you shared just before and made it very particular way,
community, yeah,
the publicly shared and editable, and maybe it could be that, for example, some of us know Ted Newcomb, and he's been really into MindMeister, and I had a bunch of Ted's maps in my MindMeister, and I can't really make any more until I empty out, and so forth. But it could be also the way that he set them up, and with the permissions wasn't the fully open version. I'm not sure. So I'm just, it might be worth, if it's a simple thing and you're already paying for it and can just set up the map, that would be worth checking.
Yeah, I can do it.
If it's really open and editable without having to have any login or whatever, then maybe that's it.
That would be nice. I will go straight ahead to MindMeister here, and somehow oh my god, so strangely. Okay.
It doesn't have to be now, but if it's easy, then might as well find out.
Okay, here we go. I will just give it a very generic title, something like Peeragogy Handbook. And then I can share it right away. I hope I'm not moving the screen aside. Publish map.
So while you're doing that, Roland, sorry, can I just really quickly say,
of course,
while I agree with what you were saying about what problems does the reader bring to this, rather than just dumping all of our problems in, I think at some point in the book, maybe more like with the pattern catalog or something, we want to kind of make the point that many of the same problems are actually going to come up time and time again. So you might think you've got very special problems, but actually those problems are probably pretty similar to other people's problems, and that's one of the principles that that we can use for pure learning is to get multiple perspectives on them. But
that's the pattern logic, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, I hope this is the right link, and I will post it right now.
I'm going to leave you fine folks to your devices. I've got to go to a workshop. 4 minutes.
Thanks a lot for your
Yeah.
participation. It was very nice to have you.
It's great to see this going forward. I really do feel like it's, you know, we're getting some traction here. So I'm really happy.
Yeah, I agree about that too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see you again soon, Charlotte. I'm gonna be around on Thursday if you have a chance for that, but no obligation.
Yeah, no, I think that's on my calendar. So.
Okay, I don't know quite even, it might just be you and me. I'm not sure about the P2P folks, but hope they do want to come to some of these reading groups as well.
Okay.
Anyway,
good.
See you later.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, I put the P2P folks into the mailing list also. And
Good.
yes, Vitor, of course, we will repeat it soon because we want to do it on a weekly basis. So
yeah, this is a good way. I know, Vitor, you're saying you hadn't. Am I still on? Yeah, Vitor, you hadn't had a chance to read the whole book, and this is a good chance to read through it with other people, which is very much the intended purpose.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So should we leave it there?
I think so, yes. There is a last provocation there from Vitor. Last provocation before I leave. Okay. But
okay. What I can't do though is save the chat at all. So please, someone could
I will
save
the chat and
put
it into a mail, I think.
Okay, fantastic. That's wonderful. Okay. Well, I'm a little worn out. But
thanks a lot for all the note taking.
Oh, that was easy. Yeah, this is one of the things I do pretty much on all these Peeragogy meetings is take notes. So we tend to have a pretty good record. Someone was saying, in terms of research, I liked your book you were showing about researching trends, and I think that, someone's wondering, is this really a research article? Because again, it looks like an easy to read, helpful book, and it should be that. But I think it is also a research project, and hopefully, if people dive into those in-depth things, they will see them. So I think it's a nice thing to kind of have both styles, and I don't think we've really nailed it with either of them yet because it's been a bit merged together, but I think we can get both in there. So we're getting there.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks very much for organizing this. I guess we'll speak next Tuesday then. Is that's the plan?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Joe.
So for an hour and a half, we took about 1 hour to talk about the Peeragogy Handbook. I think that's a very good thing to do because the book is absolutely worth it. Of course, I still thought of having this opportunity that everyone who feels inclined to do so would just tell about her or his own projects related or unrelated to pedagogy. So if there are still people who want to stay and do that, then please do so. I still have I still have about 15 minutes left. So if people have any interesting stuff or just do so. Lisa, thank you.
I would just underscore my interest in mapping and I guess that would point to a sort of subgroup or working group or what you want to call it. And then with Federated Wiki, I have a real interest. And Rob, I know you've been fairly involved, or also in conversations with Cunningham, and I haven't really gone there yet. I've been sort of watching a bit the space, but I think there's a real relevance there, and probably side by side with mapping, I guess, which again kind of points into this pattern language direction, which for me is just coming full circle, resonates a lot with this organizational idea to kind of get the whole thing turning.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else having to add something?
Yeah, but yeah, this call was super useful for sort of clarifying. Can you hear me? For some reason, my mic okay, it takes a while to get going. Yeah, clarified for me because I have been sort of experimenting for a while in how to organize sort of peer-to-peer learning groups online using remote tools, and yeah, sort of seeing how it's definitely not all about the tools. I'd say actually the success of the calls that Rowan's been running is because of his sort of more human facilitation and input rather than just the tools are going to solve everything. But yeah, this call realizing that mapping itself can play sort of a really good central role, especially in these peer-to-peer spaces where in some ways we don't want like a central silo or central hub, or at least have many hubs. So yeah, I guess thinking through in the past, maybe what I was trying to create was something more like a hub so that we all had a space that we could meet at. Maybe if we mapped all the different spaces, all the different cohorts and sort of the tools that they're using internally, and then it sort of means anybody can sort of use the interfaces that work for them in the way that sort of Charlotte was describing that, I don't know if I'd want to join another Slack or another Mattermost thing, but at least if there was some sort of mapping tool and a group of mappers who were sort of mapping out all these different dispersed little peer-to-peer learning communities, then we can sort of find each other regardless. And that also fits in with what I was saying earlier about federated tools. And yeah, federated wiki sort of this call reinvigorated my desire to sort of reach back out to Ward Cunningham, who is actually really generous in offering to basically do pair coding with me. To both, I know how to use the tool, but I haven't exactly dove in terms of like extending it. It has a lot of plugins, so it's a system that's made to extend it basically. And they do have internal sort of graph plugins that enable you to visualize small little FedWiki spaces as a graph, and actually Ward basically has a tool that scrapes the whole Fediverse, or at least the federated wiki portion of the Fediverse, and produces sort of like a data file that is pretty much the whole Fediverse. So there's some interesting ways already existing on how to, if you did want to sort of do some interesting, let's say, graph queries or social network analysis or something on the space. I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling, but I'm definitely interested in asking some questions toward, because some of the things I would want to do with FedWiki is more in the realm of adding metadata onto each sort of little wiki page. And it, as Charles pointed out, it is and was designed to be sort of a pattern language design tool. So I don't only heard here and there about how the Peeragogy book has pattern language sort of as a core component in some ways. So that's interesting. And then yeah, so I've lost the thread there, but there's definitely this call exciting me. Lots of
okay. I really look forward to seeing how you will do this, how you will implement the federated wiki ideas and the mapping, and how all this relates to patterns. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the one final thing I'll add, it occurred to me during the call that even though like I can definitely teach how to use federated wiki, because it has a lot of affordances, but I would say hasn't exactly been developed on the sort of UI UX realm in terms of all those affordances being sort of obvious and intuitive once you first land on, say, a federated wiki page. So yeah, it sort of occurred to me that it's sort of ironic that why wouldn't we be sort of peer-to-peer teaching ourselves how to use these tools in the spaces?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe we can have some extra session where you teach us how to do the federated wiki thing. Yeah, that would be very nice.
I would say that it definitely is sort of points me right back to Open Learning Commons, and also quite a bit to Digital Life Collective. Sort of in the intention or values, for whatever it's worth.
Yeah.
So is the consensus in terms of the handbook itself and the annotations to go more into the Google Doc comments or also hypothesis? I didn't quite get, I don't know if maybe you could round up sort of what's your understanding of how the harvest is going to, in the process is going to be.
I think the main venue is clearly Google Docs. I think that's where the summaries, the discussions, the annotations will take place. I still intend to use hypothesis for my own note-taking, and if people want to react on the hypothesis tool, that's fine. But I think that the major activity will be on Google Docs, at least for now.
I don't recall. Is there a group in hypothesis for this?
It's just in public.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think that's best, especially since there are not that many of us using it. It seems a bit of a waste to just hide it for general audience. I think people using hypothesis and reading the Peeragogy Handbook prove by doing that they're interesting enough to join in any discussion about it.
And that's going to be, sorry if it was stated, probably not on this call, but the hypothesis will be on the Google Docs, or no, actually on the GitHub.
It is it's on the Peeragogy GitHub site.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a question about that, is because obviously hypothesis works best with sort of static content. Does that mean we're using some sort of version thing of the Peeragogy Handbook? Like we're working on some sort of static snapshot of the state it's in at a certain period of time?
Yeah, I think that the Peeragogy GitHub version I'm using now, the hypothesis thing on, is the 3rd edition and is rather static. I don't know what will happen as soon as the 4th edition is there, though. Whether they will just, I don't know whether they actually keep the former editions. It would be interesting.
And then what happens to all the annotations then?
Yes, exactly. So that's something to ask.
I think that came up a week or two ago, but we never really resolved it. Maybe, it'd be worth talking to hypothesis. Maybe they would have some solution to actually, if not, I'm just thinking out loud, kind of, maybe directly transferring the annotations wouldn't even be what we want, but somehow to be able to collate them in a systematic way. I have no idea beyond that, but I remember the guy, I forgot his name, but he came to Howard's class and he seems approachable. Why not even just kind of ping him if somebody knows him? And I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, of course. But and he was involved with with the hypothesis. Yeah,
I think. What do you think? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, of course.
Or if Howard has an interest, I know he likes hypothesis. That could be something.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I just noticed was that on the Peeragogy.github.io link you sent, they provide a PDF link, and I know that hypothesis is really good at annotating PDFs, even if they're offline. And the neat thing with PDFs is obviously that's not going to change. And from what I heard, most PDFs have basically a hash hash sort of, I don't know if you know hashing algorithms that basically hash the contents that has a unique identifier in the PDF, so that even if, say, the documents name something, and when I heard, yeah, Hypothesis can know that we're all annotating the same PDF, even though maybe it's hosted in a different spot online, or we're even annotating it locally. So that might be an interesting, instead of the .io, which could, yeah, change at any point if we annotate it in PDF instead. But, obviously, that wouldn't change.
Well, whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm about to save the chat now. Save chat. Okay. So we can maybe edit the Google document.
Last question, or maybe before we wrap up. And I think I don't know. I didn't exactly see a rhyme or reason. It was good in terms of flowing discussion and being able to just kind of be a bit spontaneous. But in terms of the reading of the book compared to, let's say, the meta learning or process and tools and so forth aspects, which is important to figure out in the beginning. But as we go forward, I don't know how you see the balance of let's say the time real estate of the sessions. Do you have a sense of that, Roland, or anyone?
So what's the question exactly?
So there's the book itself and the kind of the content and the collective reading and annotation stuff, but then there's a lot of discussion around the process of the annotation and the tools and all of that. So and they're not the same.
They're not the same, but I think it's a bit inevitable to both. Of course, we could say maybe would you suggest to say, well, let's really reserve, I don't know, half an hour for content discussion, and then have extra time, another half hour for the meta discussion about the tools we're using? Would that be a better approach?
Anyone else have an opinion?
I feel like normally, like in Howard's class settings, a lot of the discussion migrates to the asynchronous discussion, and so there isn't the real estate doesn't feel as precious in that setup, and then it's sort of like more flexible. But I know here it's mainly this is the focus, so I don't know if that will change, if that would sort of answer the question by not forcing an answer or something.
I think just to put my question from another angle, like, does anyone sense an imbalance? You know, and I'm not sure that I do, but I'm just aware that there could be.
Because we did not speak as much about the content.
For example.
Yeah.
This time.
Yeah, that's true.
But it kind of keeps flipping back and forth, at least for me, because there's this whole meta aspect of, you know, actually we are learning and sharing views and exchanging, you know, references and all this stuff. So it's still going on.
What I did not do this time is make a summary, for instance, of the chapter. Maybe if I did that next time, automatically there would be a bit of more content-wise discussion.
Could be, yeah. I think you were sharing your screen and kind of scrolling a bit quickly and reflecting a bit freeform on the comments and annotations. And I was squinting a bit because I had my window reduced so I could map side by side. And so I don't know. I didn't sense anything particularly lacking, but
yeah, but it's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question.
I think I do that at least next time. Make this summary and have it more about what's actually in there. of course, this was the foreword and the introduction. There was already quite some content, explicit and implicit, in it, but all that will come back in the next chapters. So I think we can still catch it up and go deeper on also what the content is concerned. And especially as soon as we start talking about the pattern language, for instance, that's something which is it's not self-evident. It's something we really should explore more in depth. Where does it come from? Why do we actually believe that pattern language is so relevant for pedagogy, etc.?
I think I just put another word on my observation, which is context. I think we spent quite a bit, and rightly so, at the outset of this kind of series on the context, both in terms of the tools and platforms, but also things like, and it relates to the content of the forward, like the changing of certain links, mm-hmm. and so forth, and that's all really important and will be useful moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much for being here. I have to. I will stop the recording now, and I leave the session just running for those who want to continue.